Turkey's big push into the Mediterranean, featuring gas drilling, tough rhetoric, and warships rooted in a grand vision of a blue homeland, is causing concern from EU neighbors. Fearful of being denied a fair share of the region's bountiful natural gas wealth, Turkey sent a research vessel and a small navy armada into seas Greece claims as its own, dramatically escalating tensions on August 10th. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Friday announced that Turkey had made its biggest ever discovery of natural gas in the Black Sea. France, already at odds with Turkey over Libya and parts of the Middle East, sent in its own ships into the Mediterranean to help out Greece, prompting Erdogan to warn he would retaliate against any attack. Critics say that the Blue Homeland Doctrine is the latest example of Turkey resorting to disruption to coerce others into achieving what it wants. But Turkish officials and former admirals responsible for the policy argue Greece's demands based on a scattering of tiny islands are unfair, since Turkey has larger mainland territory in the eastern part of the sea. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the tensions in the Mediterranean. Joining me on the program today are Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador, Professor Ummu Salma Bawa, Center for European Studies, JNU, and Pramit Pal Chowdhury, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's understand and analyze the tensions between Greece and Turkey and what led to this present escalation.
Well, as you know that Greece and Turkey have historical enmity. And in the 20th century, they almost had several times wars. The last one was in 1996 over one of the islands. They almost went to the war. And now under Erdogan, essentially, we are seeing a greater claim for or involvement in geopolitics and geoeconomics of the region. Now he's trying to flex his muscles all over. Of course, as you know that these maritime boundaries within the Mediterranean and Europe were drawn under this Seville map, and which was giving all the small islands the same kind of continental shelf or for that matter economic zone, which the Turkey felt that it was being sidelined in that, it was being put at a disadvantage. So recently, when it was not such a big problem, it continued, but what happened is in the past 5 years ago, when the first discovery of the natural gas, the biggest discovery in the region in Hozu was found. At that time, that was the Egyptian maritime territory, but then Turkey was supposed to be part of that venture totally. And eventually what happened, the Israel, the Egyptians and the Cyprus and Greece, they tried to sideline Turkey in that process. So therefore, Turkey felt that it is being taken away from it, the geoeconomic advantage that it wanted, and it considered itself a big power. Secondly, it has already given up on probably on being a member of the European Union. And therefore, it has always felt slighted since 2000. They tried very hard, but there were several missteps by the European Union and they've not been able to integrate it. There is a contradiction because it happens to be a NATO country at the same time. So today what we are seeing is a problem among the on the brink by the NATO member countries. And the USA, of course, has this time sided with the Europeans on this particular because their own geoeconomic interests are involved. Now, France, Italy, all of them, it was the Italian company that has been involved in a big way in the LNG and everything. So we need to look at it from the perspective of geoeconomics in the first place and geopolitics of controlling the Mediterranean in the second. And of course, Turkey is a strong power, but now France is coming up to counter it because Greece is small. There are dog fights between Greece and or in the Aegean. We are watching it virtually on a daily basis. They have increased significantly during the month of August. So this is virtually saber rattling that is taking place between the two countries. And it was further compounded when Turkey intervened in Libya and signed the maritime agreement in November, virtually dividing the line and giving no space to the Greek or the Cyprus, anybody. So it was virtually between the two countries. They divided the whole economic zone between themselves, and Libya is in no position to exploit anything. So likewise, right. Greeks also signed a similar kind of an agreement with Egypt on August 6th. So that has brought it to this situation. And I think that this is really getting out of hand now because Turkey is not going to give in at this stage, and the France and others are going to push it once again in the region. So I think that it has to be also looked at from historical perspective. It has to be looked at from geopolitical perspective and the current geoeconomic perspective in all these three particular areas. Apart from the religious problem that is, we have seen the Hagia Sophia, which might come up later.
Absolutely. There are several dimensions, several angles to it. Of course, thank you for bringing us up to date with what led to the present flare-up. But like the ambassador said, Salma Bawa, there are historical baggages involved as well, and this particular region has had a lot of history and, it's not something new. Throw into the equation Cyprus as well, and it brings in a totally different picture altogether. And take us through, what are some of the historical problems and how this particular region has always been problematic?
Okay, thank you, Frank. I think the region has experienced conflict with a capital C. And so what you're seeing is periods of conflict and reconciliation have been the story between Turkey and Greece, at least. Many may not be aware Greece was part of the Ottoman Empire as well, and then subsequently became independent. So there is a lot of bitter historical memories, and what you're seeing, I would like to endorse what the ambassador said just now. What you're seeing is in this power shift on the chessboard of the Eastern Mediterranean, a claim for a new kind of leadership. That is what is happening. So Turkey is reinventing its identity. It is not new. It was there as the Ottoman Empire. Then we had Ataturk giving a secular face to Turkey. Turkey as the bridge. It was often called the bridge between the East and the West. And Istanbul standing out as the iconic place which would link all of this. And now under Erdogan, you see a reinventing or a kind of trying to redefine the identity back to the Ottoman. So Turkey is not under Erdogan thinking about just that space. I think we would be very wrong to think about it. Point number two, you're also seeing what happens when America gets out of its international commitments and its role as a leader, especially in that part of the world. The absence of America, even in terms of strong statements, and you can see the preoccupation of Washington with the elections at this point, also has added to Erdogan's, appeal for the strong Turkey. He's also, cutting adrift from all the Arab neighbors over there, presenting Turkey as an exclusive, different identity altogether. And so in all of this, the pushback happening with Greece. Now, when you look at it, these constant wars which has happened, it's also about when Hagia Sophia, was converted from the museum, again back into a religious site where, the first Friday prayers were held. In Greece, all the church bells rang out. It's still a very, very important religious emotive issue for Greece when you look about it. So you've got, a long history of conflict, periods of cooperation coming in. And Turkey is also extremely important to the entire issue of the refugees and the migrants and the deal with the European Union. So it is the linchpin, in a larger chain of events and the geoeconomics and the geopolitics. And Turkey knows that it can play all kinds of these cards, right? And so this exploration for oil now, when you look at the larger ramifications of the global economic situation, the impact of the COVID, the demand and supply, the glut which is there, and the falling prices of oil and gas, and even the shift to solar energy happening, it's a big surprise as to why at this point. So it's less about the gas and the oil, and it's more about asserting a claim, in the run-up to what is happening in November. And you can see how the geopolitics in the region, already the deal between Israel and UAE is also to be read within the larger part of it. So the EU also appears to be distracted at this point. Events are heating up on the eastern flank, with the movement in Belarus and the election results over there. So you can kind of see that, there is individual political push. France, as you have said, has come forward. It is the current presidency of Germany. Chancellor Merkel has stepped in. And in the last meeting, on 14th of August, the foreign ministers within the European Union have also indicated that dialogue is the way forward. So it's about reconciliation and dialogue. That's what I would like to emphasize. And the point is, can both sides find that this has been part of the equation between Turkey and Greece in their long history.
Right. So, Pramit, let me bring you to the picture now. See, a lot has been spoken about Turkey, about how Turkey is trying to be assertive, the issues that it has had with the GCC countries as well, with Israel, now with Greece, with the US, with NATO, with the NATO nations, and so on and so forth. Is Turkey biting off more than it can chew?
Well, I think Turkey has been biting off more than it can chew for quite some time. Erdogan, when he began what some have dubbed a neo-Ottoman policy of essentially asserting Turkey as the dominant player in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant, in other words, the area of the Middle East, next to Turkey and around all the way down to Egypt. He did so on a relatively strong platform. Turkey was a booming economy. The Arabs, and he saw the Arab Spring as a brilliant opportunity to essentially create or form alliances with the Muslim Brotherhood and set up a set of governments ranging from Egypt to the Gaza Strip and eventually to Syria that would be more or less aligned with him. And on all fronts, however, this first round of attempt of asserting Turkish power, which was based, I think, partly on a recognition that Turkey was by far the most powerful country in that region. We saw that all fall apart. The Morsi government that he had helped support in Egypt collapsed. The Syrian civil war went in the wrong direction because Assad has been able to largely reestablish himself in Syria. Erdogan has then shifted, if you wish, the policy elsewhere. But you see, he's at one point fought with the Russians. He shot down the Russians' fighter aircraft over the Syrian issue, then has now formed an understanding with the Russians over Syria, but is now fighting with the Russians in Libya, where they have a proxy war within the civil war. He has, as you've mentioned, others have mentioned, he's both gone on and off the United States, depending on what he's played at. He had a strong relationship with Israel, which he deep-sixed as an attempt to woo Arab support and support Islamic groups in his own country. Now he's trying to at least marginally repair that relationship with Israel, even while maintaining a degree of tension. Greece has been a constant, as others have mentioned. There's a historical reason for that. There is no real benefit for him to form a good relationship with Greece, so he's maintained a degree of tension with the Greeks constantly. But Greece has been able to form, if you wish, relationships with Israel, and now we see France intervening on their behalf, partly because I would argue Erdogan's own earlier missteps and his constant shifting back and forth means that other players simply don't trust Turkey anymore. So Turkey continues to be the country that is attempting to create a new status quo in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, I would argue that both domestically, his economy now is in tatters, and his international support is virtually zero. He's forming understandings of convenience, but as I said, nobody trusts him in the region anymore. So he forms these on and off understandings. So Erdogan, I would argue, his basic game is to maintain a degree of tension, especially with Greece, and isolate Greece as much as he possibly can, but without forcing the crisis into a major conflict of any variety, because that will not go in his favor. But I would argue he's not succeeding, in part because his past record has been so poor that nobody is prepared to align. So he may be wooing Israel, at least making noises in that direction. Israel fundamentally believes Turkey is now their enemy. Even the Russians don't really trust him. The Americans have extraordinarily negative views about him as well. So Turkey, I would argue, continues to be effectively semi-isolated in the region, diplomatically and politically. It has a very bizarre military position of being a member of NATO, triggering a crisis with another member of NATO, Greece, having Greece supported by yet another member of NATO, which is France, and trying to keep the Americans, the premier power in NATO, happy at the same time, even though the Americans are very clear they don't trust them. and then trying to buy weapons from the Russians,
Right.
which of course the Americans saying that's just unacceptable for a NATO member. So he's I would argue over time we're seeing Erdogan juggling more and more balls in an attempt to maintain both his domestic position and his regional policy. But I would argue the number of balls he's throwing up in the air and the act that he has to put on is getting more and more complicated. And I see at some point a lot of this starting to unravel, as did the first attempt at the neo-Ottoman policy in the Levant region.
Right. Okay, taking the discussion forward now. So, Ambassador, what does all of this, heightened tension mean for the region as a whole?
Well, the region is because I would just take you first to the Libyan context, because currently that is where there is the biggest action taking place, and where all these European countries are involved, all the regional countries are involved, and Turkey is the most recent entrant militarily on behalf of the government of Siraj in the western part of Libya. And that is why this whole thing began, because when he signed this maritime agreement with Libya, it provoked an immediate action because it bypassed all the major islands, and he started going around Crete, which is the biggest island of Greece, and started drilling around there. Now, this has divided the countries. I mean, interestingly, in the Mediterranean, East Mediterranean especially, Eni, which is an Italian company, right? That is the main company which is doing all the business there, whether it is in Cyprus or whether it is in Egypt. And that's where they wanted to have all this natural gas and supply as LNG out of the LNG plants from Egypt to the rest of Europe. But at the same time, Italy is the one which is supporting, as Prameet said, I mean, there are so many balls in the air. So supporting Erdogan in Libya, right? At the same time, France, its own company Total, is also part of the same enterprise in Eastern Mediterranean. But France is opposing Erdogan in Libya. We see the British, the others. But coming to the question where the European Union at the moment has said, if you just see the Mediterranean countries, so while you see that Greece, Cyprus, and France are on the one side in this whole thing, you see that Turkey is supported by Italy, Malta, and Spain. They are all three Mediterranean countries in the region. So that is the division there. US until recent supports Libya in Libya, supports Erdogan, but now is trying to put pressure. The whole idea is that this should not become a conflagrated zone once again in the Eastern Mediterranean, because US also has a tremendous economic interest there. So I'm saying this is more geoeconomics there rather than the geopolitics. And since Erdogan thinks that his stakes are probably much higher, that's his calculation or probably miscalculation, that he could win this is not good. Of course, Israel, after this UAE-Israel thing, he tried to disrupt relationship with the UAE and condemned it and wanted to even close his mission, which I doubt very much because he himself has good relations with Israel. So likewise in Lebanon. So this is going to remain a conflict for some more time because there are many theaters that are convoluted into one another. So that is where we have to see how it is going to play out. Of course, in Libya we have seen the some kind of peace agreement, which also shows that. But yesterday or today, I think General Haftar has not agreed to the ceasefire. That is amazing because his own political boss has agreed to that, and Russia, Egypt, everybody had agreed. Now, if you see the Egypt and Turkey, they were on loggerheads. They were almost going to go to war because Egyptian parliament had allowed the deployment of the Egyptian forces that have been stopped by the regional countries as well as the Americans. But this could have been a war between the Turks and the Egyptians on the Libyan soil. So this whole thing is getting into a very, I would say, murkier scenario, and it has the potential of getting out of hand. But I guess at the moment, he has to count his eggs before he can hedge them.
All right. So, Salma Baba, let's talk about some of the other major European players now, France and Germany. Of course, you've seen France take an aggressive stand against Turkey, especially on this particular issue. Germany has offered to intervene and negotiate and try and bring about some kind of peace between the two countries. What does this mean for the major European players and what's likely to happen as far as they are concerned?
So you can also see, that on one platform, especially on NATO, let me just start over there, these two are members, and you don't expect members of a community would be taking on each other. That's a no-go. But it has happened in the past, so it doesn't prevent, and for Erdogan, it serves the purpose over here. On the issue of the European Union, you can also see that how Ambassador also pointed out, you've got business interests which are also in some ways driving the political equations. So countries coming out, depending on how much they are exposed in economic terms in supporting what is happening, right? Protecting their basic business interest first. For Germany, it's quite a critical situation. Within this pandemic situation, Germany now has the presidency of the European Union. And with the largest, expat population of Turks living in Germany, there's a very big constituency also which is there. So you have, when you put all these equations together, Germany at this point is also seeing that how, reconciliation is a better option, or at least a de-escalation. Let's put it down. You have to de-escalate first and then get back to the table and then see what can work out on the issue. So I think there is that particular issue. What has also happened is that the European Union, the bigger countries also are also preoccupied at this point with the pandemic. So there is a lot of internal focus which has also taken place, which means there is less appetite to be drawn into conflict at this point. This conflict is seen further away, and then you can see that after that meeting of the foreign ministers, you've not had something more major happen. Whereas the major development is what is happening on the eastern side, as I indicated earlier. So we can clearly see that there is a competing political space within the European Union, with countries definitely taking sides because of their business and economic exposure to Turkey. And Turkey is leveraging on that. Turkey also knows that it can renegade on the deal on the refugees at any time, and the countries which would be impacted would be again like Greece and Italy, right? So I mean, the frontline Mediterranean states are the ones which are in a very catch-22 kind of situation, which is they would not want to get in more refugees. At the same time, they don't want this conflict with a EU member spilling onto the larger European Union. So you can feel the political tension, and I think one way of reading it is trying to find an internal solution also within the European players to say that let's de-escalate this first. Let's not allow this to grow further.
Absolutely. So, Pramit, where do you see all of this headed? Because the equations and the dimensions in the region especially are changing drastically and dramatically. We saw the deal between the UAE and Israel as well, which was termed historic. So where do you see all of this headed?
It's a good question. It's not completely certain, but I think broadly we can see I would say an alliance, but a coalition of convenience forming. As you mentioned, UAE, Saudi Arabia, to some degree Kuwait, Israel, and probably the United States, at least with this administration, forming on one side with, and of course Greece, and now it seems France, on forming this rough coalition on one end. And another one that is roughly Turkey, to some degree Russia, though again, the Turks and the Russians don't agree on everything. To some degree, Turkey has also been wooing China, but China has an economic role, but it's very clear it's not interested in the military role in that region. So Turkey doesn't have too many players on its side, and its game is to really, as other speakers have mentioned, leverage different points of pressure that it has on various countries, whether it's the migrants, whether it's anything else. But Turkey, in my view, is weakening internally. Its economy, the lira, their currency, has lost about 20% to 25% of its value against the US dollar, and is struggling to keep its economy, broader economy, afloat. So it's got a weakening hand. The natural gas call, the fine, I don't think really will matter that much. $350 billion, 350 billion cubic feet or meters is actually relatively small. For example, Israel has found one field in the Eastern Mediterranean called Leviathan, which is 1 trillion but it still has not been able to, at a time when gas prices globally are at rock bottom. Offshore gas is simply no longer seen as profitable or viable. Nobody is prepared to invest in them. So you can say all the gas you find, but it doesn't really matter right now. You're not going to get anybody to put any money into that for at least 10 years. If anything, the world is awash with gas. There's way too much gas coming out of the system, and offshore gas is the most expensive. So it's a nice gesture. I mean, he played it well, but it doesn't matter economically. So I think I would see Turkey continuing to be isolated, and I think struggling to, as I said, create a situation where it is able to at least reduce its losses over time. But at present, Erdogan, I think largely for domestic political reasons, not in a position to go in and try to negotiate deals. So, for example, there is an Eastern Mediterranean forum that has created by many of the member states, and Turkey has been repeatedly invited to join, so there can at least be a discussion about issues like territorial disputes and so on, and it has point blank refused. It doesn't see, it sees joining the forum and having to talk through its problems as a sign of weakness and surrender. And I think they will continue to be at the losing end. It's a very gradual loss over time. For at least another year, I would suspect, before they are prepared to consider coming to a negotiated settlement. But for now, its policies are probably, it feels, Erdogan believes his policies are best accomplished by maintaining a degree of tension and a sort of confrontation with a lot of his enemies, with his neighbors.
Okay. Time now to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward, starting first with you, Ambassador.
Well, I think that all sides have to look at this civil map, which was supposed to be bad in law. But the problem with Turkey has been that it is not even a member of UNCLOS. You know, it should have been a member of this so that it could file its claims. So the only thing is that they need to really come down to the negotiating table. But Erdogan, as was mentioned by Pramit and the professor, is that Erdogan today thinks that he is on an ascendant and he is an advantage, but his economy will not support him, even if militarily he is very strong. So the dialogue is the only option for them.
All right, Salma?
I think Erdogan is projecting strength and doing politics by other means. You know, it's also to buy in time with the domestic constituency. Remember, Turkey is also, you know, stuck with the pandemic. So this is also, you know, contributing to the image of the strong man. But I think in the large scale, you know, the parties around will have to step back and de-escalate. And so the EU and NATO at some point will have to enhance the engagement with the issue.
All right. And Pramit, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I'll just say while India is not a player in the Eastern Mediterranean at all and does not wish to be, India, I would argue, is not uncomfortable with the fact that Erdogan's power or his situation is worsening. As you know, he has also tried to join hands with Pakistan and Malaysia to give both India a hard time, but also to try to balance against Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Gulf region, and seen it as part of his own projection, attempt to create himself as a sort of leader of the Islamic world. And so we see that I think India is quite happy to see him be increasingly overstretched. And eventually, partly because of his really rhetorical relationship with Pakistan more than anything else, if he were to fail, then if Pakistan is therefore further weakened, India would not have much problem with that.
All right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that the issue has several dimensions to it. There is historical baggage, geopolitical, as well as the biggest of them all is geoeconomics. The situation has turned for the worse with high-pitched saber-rattling and rhetoric at this